The alien threat emerges empire. It was a day like any other on Earth. At least, that's what the people thought. Cities hummed with activity, the stars glittered in the sky, and the peaceful silence of space surrounded the planet. But that all changed in the blink of an eye. Humanity had always believed that the vast emptiness of space was their ally. The stars above, far from being a threat, were seen as distant neighbors, some still undiscovered but harmless. But in one terrifying moment, the truth came crashing down. The Zathari Empire, a ruthless alien species, had turned its attention toward Earth, and their vast fleet was already on its way. At first, the Earth's defense systems detected strange movements in space, small, almost unnoticeable disturbances that came and went like whispers in the wind. Military experts thought nothing of it. Maybe a few rogue asteroids, or a wayward ship lost in the vastness of space. The idea that an alien empire would target Earth was dismissed as a fantasy. Then came the first attack. It wasn't much at first, just a single ship appearing at the edges of Earth's space station. A ship that was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Massive, dark, and with sharp angles that seemed to cut through the very air around them. It opened fire without warning. The energy blasts were so powerful they ripped through the space station's shields, tearing apart sections in seconds. The people on Earth were in shock. How could something so powerful just appear out of nowhere? How could they fight back against an enemy they knew nothing about? The news channels flooded with reports, but they didn't understand what was happening. That first ship was just the beginning. One by one, more ships arrived, each more terrifying than the last. Soon, the sky above Earth was filled with the dark shapes of the Zathari fleet. Thousands of ships, sleek and deadly, each one carrying advanced weapons that humanity could not even begin to comprehend. The alien armada was not just arriving, it was preparing to invade. The government quickly declared a state of emergency. Panic spread across the globe as cities braced for the worst. People rushed to shelters, leaving everything behind. Leaders held emergency meetings, but it was clear that the Earth's military, no matter how advanced, could not stand against the alien force. The Zathari Empire's technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever seen. Their ships moved with eerie precision, each one like a shadow in the night, too fast to track, too powerful to stop. The Earth's greatest minds worked together, trying to understand the enemy. They soon learned that the Zathari were not just conquerors, they were merciless predators. The Zathari Empire had destroyed countless civilizations across the galaxy, leaving nothing but ashes behind. They took what they wanted, whether it was resources, technology, or entire worlds. Earth was just another target, another prize to be claimed. As the Zathari ships moved closer, humanity's last hope rested on one thing: the fleet of human ships stationed near Mars, including the Defiant, the fastest and most advanced warship ever built. But even the Defiant was no match for an entire armada. The Defiant was built for speed and agility, designed to escape, not to fight. Still, Commander Carter, the captain of the Defiant, knew they had no choice but to try. The fate of Earth depended on it. With every passing moment, the alien fleet grew closer, their presence casting a shadow over Earth. Humanity's defenses were weak. Earth's last line of defense, the Defiant, was untested in battle. Could this lone ship stand against the Zathari? Or would it too fall like so many others before? The alien armada was coming. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see if humanity could survive. The Defiant's last stand. The situation was growing worse with every hour. The Zathari fleet was on the move, and Earth's defenses were crumbling. Cities were falling into chaos as people realized there was no escape. The enemy's ships loomed above, dark and silent, like vultures circling their prey. The world's leaders, now facing a grim reality, made one final desperate call for help. The Defiant was Earth's last hope. Commander Carter stood on the bridge of the Defiant, staring out into the vast darkness of space. The ship was one of the fastest and most advanced in the human fleet, but it was still small compared to the Zathari Armada. In the face of such overwhelming odds, Carter couldn't help but wonder if this was their final stand. "Captain," said Lieutenant Harris, breaking the silence, "we've received word from Earth Command. The invasion is proceeding faster than anticipated. The fleet is nearly upon us." Carter nodded grimly. He had known this day would come, but he never imagined it would be like this. "Prepare the crew," he said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "We're not running. We're going to fight." The crew of the Defiant gathered on the bridge, their faces a mix of fear and resolve. Everyone knew this was a suicide mission. They were not trained to fight in Armada. They were outgunned and outnumbered. Yet, as they all stared at their captain, they understood the gravity of the situation. There was no turning back. Earth was counting on them, and for the first time in their lives, they were ready to fight, not just for survival, but for their home. "We're going to hit them where it hurts," Carter continued, turning to the tactical officer, Commander Lee. "What's the status of the Zathari fleet?" Lee quickly pulled up a holographic map of space. The alien Armada was vast, stretching across light years, a wall of firepower that could wipe out entire planets. "We've identified their central command ship," Lee said, pointing to a massive structure at the heart of the fleet. "Taking that down could throw their entire fleet into disarray, but it's heavily protected. If we're going to have any chance, we'll have to get close." Carter thought for a moment. The plan was reckless, but it was the only chance they had. "We'll do what we do best. Get in, make them feel the pain, and get out. The Defiant might be small, but we got speed on our side." The crew nodded. They knew the risks, but there was something else. Something deep within them that told them they couldn't just sit back and wait to be wiped out. They were humans, and humans didn't give up. As the Defiant prepared to launch, the crew made their final checks. The ship's engines roared to life, and it shot forward, breaking through Earth's orbit and heading straight toward the heart of the enemy fleet. The massive Zathari ships, unaware of the human ship's approach, continued their calculated march toward Earth. Suddenly, a loud alarm blared. "Incoming fire," shouted Lieutenant Harris. The Defiant swerved sharply to the left, dodging the first blast of energy from a Zathari destroyer. The ship shook violently, and alarms blared as the crew scrambled to keep control. "They've spotted us," Lee yelled, as more Zathari ships began to open fire. The Defiant danced between explosions, using its agility to stay alive. Carter barked orders, his mind sharp as he guided the ship toward the heart of the enemy fleet. "We're not out of this yet," Carter said, gripping the controls. "Keep it steady." The crew fought together, each member doing their part to keep the ship in one piece. Commander Lee managed to disable a few of the alien ship's weapon systems, while Harris piloted the Defiant with unmatched skill. It was a dance of destruction. Alien lasers zipping past them as they dodged, weaved, and struck back with everything they had. As they got closer to the heart of the Zathari fleet, Carter's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. This was the moment that would decide humanity's fate. Could they actually do it? Could they really defeat the Zathari, or would they, too, fall like all the others? Without warning, the ship's hull trembled again as another blast hit. Sparks flew across the bridge, and the lights flickered. Carter could hear the groans of the ship's engines struggling under the pressure. The Defiant was already taking damage. But they were close. So close. "This is it," Carter muttered, watching the central command ship grow larger in the view screen. "We strike now." With one final command, the crew engaged their weapons, and the Defiant surged forward, heading directly toward the Zathari flagship. The battle was about to get even more intense. A desperate plan. The Defiant rocked under the weight of the battle. Explosions echoed through the hull, and the ship's systems flickered, struggling to keep up with the relentless fire from the Zathari Armada. Commander Carter's grip tightened on the controls, his mind racing. They had taken down a few enemy ships, But it wasn't enough. The Zathari fleet was vast, too vast for the Defiant to handle alone. If they didn't find a way to cripple the alien forces soon, Earth would fall. On the bridge, the crew worked in sync, each person focused on their role. Lieutenant Harris continued to dodge incoming fire with unmatched skill, while Commander Lee was tirelessly working on a counterattack. But despite their efforts, the Zathari's overwhelming numbers and superior firepower were slowly wearing them down. Carter's eyes flicked over the data pouring in. Earth's defenses had fallen, and their allies were nowhere to be seen. The Zathari were closing in, ready to destroy everything in their path. There had to be a way to turn the tide. There had to be something they could do. He turned to his officers. Lieutenant Harris, take us closer to the Zathari command ship. Commander Lee, what's our status? Lee was already scanning the alien ships. The Zathari fleet has a weakness, Captain, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Their command ship is the key. If we can disable it, we might disrupt their entire fleet, but it's heavily protected. The shields are too strong, and their weapons are nearly impossible to avoid. Carter nodded. What's our plan of attack? Lee paused, her eyes narrowing as she examined the data. There's a small window, a gap in their defenses. If we can get close enough, I believe we can use our experimental energy beam to disable their shields. But the beam's range is short, and once we use it, we'll be exposed. We'll need to make the shot count. Carter thought for a moment. The plan was risky, but it was their only shot. We'll make it work, he said, his voice resolute. Lieutenant Harris, take us in. Full speed. The Defiant surged forward, dodging blasts from the alien ships. The crew held their breath, knowing that one mistake could cost them everything. Harris's hands were steady as she piloted the ship, guiding it through the hail of fire. They were closing in on the Zathari flagship, but the closer they got, the more dangerous it became. Shields are at 40%, shouted Lieutenant Harris, her voice strained. We won't last long at this rate. Carter gritted his teeth. They couldn't turn back now. We have to make it to that gap. Full speed ahead. As the Defiant drew closer, Lee prepared the energy beam. The experimental weapon had never been used in a live combat situation. It was their only hope, but no one knew if it would work. It had been designed to disable enemy shields and give humanity a chance to strike back. But its power was unpredictable. It could save them, or it could destroy them. The Zathari flagship loomed ahead, its massive guns targeting the Defiant. The ship shuddered as another blast hit, and sparks flew from the walls. The crew pushed forward, determined to give everything they had. Target locked. Lee called out, ready to fire. Carter's heart raced. Do it. Fire now. The energy beam shot out, a blinding blue-white light that seemed to pierce the very fabric of space. The beam struck the Zathari flagship's shield with a violent impact. For a moment, nothing happened, but then, with a crackling sound, the shields flickered, then disappeared. We've done it, Lee shouted. The shields are down. Now's our chance. The Defiant was exposed, floating in the middle of the alien fleet. The Zathari ships began to lock onto them, preparing to fire. Carter knew they only had moments before the full fury of the enemy was unleashed. Prepare for evasive maneuvers, he ordered. We need to finish this before they recover. The crew of the Defiant was ready. With the shields down, they now had a clear path to strike at the heart of the Zathari fleet. But the clock was ticking. The longer they stayed in the line of fire, the less likely they were to make it out alive. The first strike. The Defiant shuddered as it braced itself for what was about to come. With their shields down and the energy beam successfully disrupting the Zathari flagship's defenses, the crew knew they had one shot. The moment of truth had arrived. Commander Carter could feel the weight of it, the pressure to protect Earth, the hope of survival hanging by a thread. Lieutenant Harris, bring us around to the flagship's weak point, Carter ordered, his voice steady despite the storm raging around them. Harris's hands were quick on the controls, the Defiant veering sharply through the chaos of the battlefield. Alien ships swarmed around them like hungry predators, but the Defiant was faster. The crew was giving it everything they had, maneuvering through the hail of laser fire, evading, attacking, and surviving by pure skill. Target locked. Commander Lee shouted. She was watching the Zathuri flagship closely, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. If we don't hit it now, we'll never get another chance. Do it, Carter barked, his eyes fixed on the massive alien ship. It was just ahead, vulnerable, its shields down, waiting for the final blow. Lee's fingers flew over the weapon's controls, and in an instant, the Defiant unleashed its full firepower. A massive burst of energy tore through the silence of space, hitting the Zathuri flagship directly. The blast rocked the alien ship, shaking its structure and sending a shockwave through its ranks. For a moment, the space around the Defiant was lit up by the explosion, the enemy flagship glowing with the heat of its internal fires. Direct hit, Lee exclaimed, a rare grin of triumph crossing her face. We've cracked their armor. The Zathuri flagship staggered in space, its massive form now vulnerable. But the victory was short-lived. The remaining Zathuri ships began to move, circling like a pack of wolves around their wounded leader. They weren't going to let the Defiant escape that easily. Damage report. Carter called out as another round of enemy fire slammed into the Defiant. We're at 30% on the port side, Harris reported, her voice tight with stress. We've lost 2 engines. We won't be able to keep up this pace much longer. Carter gritted his teeth. They had dealt a significant blow, but they still had to survive long enough to finish the job. We've got to keep them distracted, he said, turning to Lee. Can we target the flagship's power core? Lee was already analyzing the data. It's risky, but we can try. If we hit the power core directly, it could trigger a chain reaction that destroys the ship, and maybe the entire fleet. Make it happen, Carter ordered. We can't wait any longer. The Defiant weaved its way closer to the Zathuri flagship, moving faster than its massive enemies could follow. Harris's hands were steady, guiding the ship through the firestorm, dodging blasts that would have torn other ships apart. The Defiant was battered, its hull scarred, but it wasn't giving up. As they closed in on the flagship, Lee locked onto the power core, adjusting the targeting system for the final strike. Almost there, just a few more seconds, she muttered under her breath. Carter could feel the tension in the air, thick with anticipation. The entire crew held their breath as Lee took the shot. A blast of brilliant energy shot from the Defiant, hitting the heart of the Zathuri flagship. The moment it connected, there was a terrible explosion, so bright it seemed to burn the very fabric of space. The flagship shook violently, and for a moment, it looked like the ship would hold together. But then, a massive chain reaction began, and the alien vessel started to break apart. The enemy fleet's formation faltered, and Zathuri ships began to turn on each other as their command structure collapsed. We did it, Lee shouted, but there was no time for celebration. The Defiant was still in the heart of the alien fleet, and more Zathuri ships were closing in. Their shields were down, their engines struggling, and the human ship was surrounded. They had struck a devastating blow, but they still needed to survive long enough to get back to Earth. Evasive maneuvers, Carter commanded. We've shaken their flagship, but the fight's not over. Let's finish this. The Defiant darted through the debris, weaving in and out of the wreckage of the shattered Zathuri flagship. The alien ships were in disarray, but they were still a deadly threat. The crew knew that this wasn't the time to rest. They had to push forward, make their escape, and make sure that the Zathuri fleet didn't recover. The Defiant had dealt its first, crushing blow, but the battle for Earth had only just begun. The tide turns. The Defiant raced through the wreckage of the Zathuri flagship, its engines straining against the damage it had taken. The explosion had caused massive chaos among the alien fleet, but the Defiant wasn't in the clear yet. The enemy was regrouping, their ships quickly realigning into new formations, preparing to strike back with full force. The battle was far from over, and the crew knew that they couldn't afford to stop now. "Damage report," Carter shouted, his voice sharp and focused. "Shields at 20%, engines at 40% capacity." Lieutenant Harris reported, her eyes scanning the control panels. "We can't keep up this pace much longer." Commander Lee's fingers flew across the tactical console, pulling up data on the remaining Zathari ships. "The fleet is recovering faster than expected," she said. "They've reformed and are coming in hot. If we don't find a way to disrupt them now, we'll be overwhelmed." Carter's mind raced. They had dealt a devastating blow to the enemy flagship, but that wasn't enough. The Zathari Armada was still a formidable force, and the Defiant was barely holding together. They needed to act fast. "We've bought ourselves some time," he said, his voice filled with resolve. "Now we use it." He turned to Harris. "Lieutenant, can you take us to the Zathari command ship's secondary control hub? It's on the far side of the fleet. We hit that, and it could cripple their coordination." Harris nodded, her hands flying over the controls. "I can get us there, but we'll be deep in enemy territory. It's going to be dangerous." "I know," Carter replied, "but it's our best chance." The Defiant sped toward the outer edges of the alien fleet, weaving between destroyed Zathari ships, sparks flying from their broken forms. The alien fleet was still reeling from the loss of their flagship, but they were quickly regaining their senses. More enemy ships locked onto the Defiant, their weapons charging. "Get ready for another fight," Lieutenant Harris said, her voice tense. "They're targeting us again." Carter's eyes were fixed on the approaching ships. "We'll make it through," he said, his voice unwavering. "We've already done the impossible. This next strike will turn the tide." With expert precision, Harris piloted the Defiant through the flurry of enemy fire. Blasts from alien cannons whizzed past them, narrowly missing their mark. The crew held their breath, knowing that one wrong move could be the end. But the Defiant was agile, darting through space with a speed and grace that no Zathari ship could match. "We're almost there," Lee said, her eyes focused on the target, locking onto the secondary control hub. "We're going to need a clean shot." As the Defiant neared the target, a massive Zathari cruiser came into view, its weapons primed. "They're not going to let us get away with this," Harris warned. "We're going to have to make this count," Carter replied. He turned to Lee. "Are we ready?" Lee didn't hesitate. Ready to fire. The Defiant's energy cannon flared to life, a brilliant beam of energy cutting through the darkness of space. The shot hit the Zathari control hub with precision, causing the alien cruiser to shudder violently. There was a massive explosion, and the cruiser erupted in flames, sending shockwaves through the surrounding ships. The rest of the Zathari fleet faltered, their coordination disrupted. The chain of command had been broken, and chaos spread through their ranks. Ships collided, firing at anything in sight, their once precise formations now in disarray. Carter couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. "We've done it. The fleet's breaking apart." But the victory was short-lived. As the Zathari fleet struggled to regroup, a massive warship appeared from the depths of the Armada. Its size dwarfed even the largest of the Zathari cruisers, and its weapons were unlike anything the Defiant had faced before. The Zathari had kept their strongest ship in reserve. Now it was coming for them. "This is not over," Lee said, her voice tight with tension. "The enemy's last hope is coming for us." Carter's eyes narrowed as the warship began charging its weapons. The crew was battered, the Defiant barely holding together, but they couldn't back down now. "Brace yourselves," he ordered. "We fight until the end." The Defiant was surrounded, the alien fleet still recovering but closing in fast. But Commander Carter and his crew were determined. They had fought against impossible odds before, and they would do it again. The battle for Earth was not over. Not yet. The hidden weapon. The Defiant raced through the chaos, dodging blasts from the remaining Zathari ships. The alien fleet had been shaken, but the battle was far from over. A massive Zathori warship, larger than anything they had seen before, was closing in fast. Its weapons were powered up, and its target was clear, the Defiant. Commander Carter gripped the controls, his eyes focused on the incoming fire. They had dealt a significant blow to the Zathori, but they were still outnumbered and outgunned. The ship's engines were struggling, the hull battered from earlier hits. And now, this giant Zathori warship was preparing to deliver the killing blow. "We can't outrun it," Lieutenant Harris said, her voice tight with worry. "It's too fast, and its weapons are too powerful. We need something more." Carter's mind raced. They had already used their experimental energy beam, and they had hit the heart of the Zathori fleet. But they couldn't stop now. They had one chance left, but it was a risky move. He turned to his officers. "Commander Lee, is the hidden weapon ready?" Lee glanced at him, her face tense. "We've been keeping it in reserve for an emergency, but it's never been tested in live combat. I can't guarantee it will work, Captain. If it does, it could turn the tide of this battle. But if it fails, we die," Carter finished. He didn't need to hear more. They had no other option. "Activate it, Lee. This is our last shot." Lee hesitated for just a moment before flipping the switch. A low hum filled the bridge as a new system powered up in the depths of the Defiant. The weapon was a last-ditch effort, a secret technology developed by humanity's best scientists. It was a massive energy cannon capable of destabilizing even the strongest of alien shields and causing massive damage to enemy ships. But it was risky. The weapon could easily backfire and destroy the Defiant in the process. "Ready to fire," Lee said, her voice steady, though her hands shook. The Zathori warship was closing in, its massive guns locked onto the Defiant. The crew braced themselves for impact, knowing they couldn't survive another barrage. "Fire now," Carter ordered. A blinding beam of energy shot from the Defiant, far brighter and more powerful than anything they had used before. The entire ship jolted as the energy cannon discharged, shaking the crew to their bones. The beam flew straight toward the Zathori warship, cutting through space like a knife through the darkness. It struck the warship's shields with a deafening roar. For a moment, nothing happened. The Zathori warship seemed to shrug off the blast, but then something began to change. The shield flickered, weakened by the immense energy, and cracks began to form. The warship's engines sputtered, and its weapons went silent. The Defiant's crew gasped in disbelief. The hidden weapon had worked. The Zathori warship's shields were failing. "We've breached their defenses," Lee shouted, her eyes wide with shock. "We've got a clear shot." But Carter didn't wait. "Lieutenant Harris, full speed ahead. Now's our chance." Harris pushed the engines to their limit, and the Defiant surged forward, its remaining power now focused on a single desperate strike. The Zathori warship, its shields failing, was unable to react in time. The Defiant closed in fast, firing everything they had left. The Defiant's weapons unleashed a final barrage, lasers, missiles, and everything else they could muster, all aimed directly at the heart of the Zathori warship. The shots hit with devastating force, and the massive ship groaned as it began to break apart. Carter's eyes never left the view screen as the warship exploded in a blinding fireball. The shockwave rattled the Defiant, and the crew held their breath, waiting for the dust to settle. When the light faded, the Zathori warship was gone. In its place, there was nothing but the scattered remains of its broken hull. "We did it," Lee whispered, staring at the destruction. Carter exhaled slowly, his heart still pounding. "We've crippled their command ship. The fleet's lost its leader. But we're not out of this yet. Stay sharp." Even though they had dealt a huge blow, the Defiant was still surrounded by Zathori ships, and the battle wasn't over. The alien fleet was regrouping, their anger turning toward the human ship that had dared to defy them. The Defiant was wounded, but it had made a statement. Humanity was not going to die quietly. The final battle. The Defiant trembled as its systems struggled to hold together. The hidden weapon had worked, and the Zathuri warship had been destroyed in a massive explosion. But the victory had come at a price. The ship was severely damaged. Its hull was scorched, its engines groaning, and the crew was exhausted. They had fought their hardest, but they were still deep inside the enemy fleet. The battle wasn't over, and the Zathuri were not about to give up. "Captain, we've taken too much damage," Lieutenant Harris said, her voice strained. "We're down to 10% engine power, and the weapons systems are almost offline. We can't keep going like this." Commander Carter's eyes scanned the bridge, looking at his team. They had come so far, but now they were running on fumes. They had dealt a significant blow to the Zathuri fleet, but the enemy wasn't finished yet. Their ships were circling, regrouping, and preparing for their final assault. The Defiant was surrounded. "We can't stop now," Carter said, his voice firm. "We've hurt them badly, but we're not finished until they are. We're going to finish what we started." Carter turned to Commander Lee. "What's the status of the remaining Zathuri ships?" Lee was already scanning the fleet. "The warship we destroyed was their flagship," she said. "Without it, the rest of the Zathuri fleet is leaderless. But they're still dangerous. They're desperate now, and we're in the heart of their territory. We need to act fast before they regroup." Harris' hands gripped the controls, trying to get the ship moving. "We're sitting ducks if we don't move now, Captain. We need to make a run for it. Head back to Earth while we still can." But Carter didn't want to retreat. Not after everything they had fought for. "We're not running," he said. "We're going to strike the heart of their forces, take out their remaining fleet, and make sure they can't hurt Earth." The crew exchanged looks, but there was no hesitation in their eyes. They had come this far, and they would finish the job. "Lieutenant Harris," Carter continued, "get us in position to take out their command center. We need to hit them hard and fast before they can recover." Harris nodded, her hands steady despite the strain. "Aye, Captain." Taking us in. The Defiant surged forward, barely able to maintain speed. The alien ships were closing in, their weapons ready to fire. The Defiant was weaker, slower, and vulnerable, but they were not alone. Commander Carter could feel the unity of his crew, each person determined to fight, no matter the odds. "Prepare to fire everything we have left," Lee called out, her fingers flying over the weapons console. "This is it." The crew fired everything they had. The last of the Defiant's energy weapons, missiles, and lasers. The concentrated firepower hit the remaining Zathuri ships with devastating force. The alien fleet was caught off guard, their remaining ships scrambling to defend themselves. The Defiant weaved between explosions, firing relentlessly, refusing to give in. Carter didn't stop. "Keep pushing. We're breaking their formation." For the first time in the battle, the Zathuri fleet was faltering. Their ships were falling, one by one, as the Defiant's weapons tore through their defenses. The humans had shown them what they were capable of. But then, just when it seemed like the tide was turning in their favor, another Zathuri warship appeared. A massive vessel, far bigger than anything they had faced so far. It was unlike anything they had seen before. The ship was bristling with weapons, its hull dark and menacing. It was their final weapon, the last hope of the Zathuri. "Brace for impact," Harris shouted as the warship opened fire. The Defiant took hit after hit, the ship rocking violently under the barrage. The crew gritted their teeth, refusing to give up, but they knew they couldn't take much more of this. "Captain," Lee called out, "we've got a weakness right at the core of their ship's power grid. If we can get close enough, we can disable it. But we're going to need everything we have left." Carter didn't hesitate. "Do it. This is our last chance." Harris pushed the Defiant forward with everything it had, dodging enemy fire with expert precision. The Zathuri warship's weapons were charging again, ready to deliver the final blow. But the Defiant was fast. They closed the distance, and just as the enemy warship fired, Carter gave the order. "Fire." The Defiant unleashed its last weapon, the last of its energy reserves. The beam shot out, cutting through space with precision. It struck the power core of the Zathuri warship, causing a massive explosion. The alien ship buckled, its systems failing as the core imploded. A wave of destruction swept through the remaining Zathuri fleet. One by one, the alien ships began to fall. The enemy fleet was broken, scattered in pieces across the battlefield. The remaining Zathuri ships, leaderless and disorganized, had no chance against the relentless assault of the Defiant. The Defiant was battered, bruised, but victorious. "We did it," Lee whispered, disbelief in her voice. Carter let out a long breath, his hand still gripping the controls. "Yeah, we did. Earth's safe." The crew of the Defiant stood silent for a moment, staring at the debris of the fallen Zathuri fleet. They had won. Against all odds, against a superior force, they had triumphed. The battle for Earth was over. But the war for humanity's survival had only just begun. Victory and sacrifice. The Defiant hung in the stillness of space, the battlefield now silent. The once mighty Zathuri fleet, the threat that had loomed over Earth for so long, was nothing more than shattered debris scattered across the stars. The battle had been won, but the victory was bittersweet. The Defiant was barely holding together, its hull scarred by explosions and the strain of the fierce fight. The crew was battered, exhausted, and bruised, but they had survived. Commander Carter stood on the bridge, staring out at the remains of the alien fleet. The calm after the storm felt strange. It was hard to believe they had made it through. They had done the impossible. The Defiant had faced an entire armada, and against all odds, they had triumphed. But there was a cost, one that no one could ignore. "Captain," Lieutenant Harris said quietly, breaking the silence, "the engines are failing. We've lost too much power to keep moving. We'll need help to get back to Earth." Carter nodded slowly. He had known this moment was coming. The Defiant had fought with everything it had, but the price was high. The ship had been pushed to its limits, and now it was broken. "We'll make it back," Carter said, his voice firm. "We've got time. Earth can wait a little longer." But as the crew looked out at the wreckage of the battle, they knew the truth. It wasn't just the ship that was broken. There were losses among them, crew members who hadn't made it. The sacrifice weighed heavy on Carter's heart. Lieutenant Harris turned to him. "Sir, we've lost a lot of good people, and we almost didn't make it." Carter's gaze softened. He had seen the faces of the fallen. He knew the sacrifices they had made, but they had done it for Earth, for humanity. "We made it," Carter said quietly. "They didn't die in vain. We saved Earth. We stopped the Zathuri. They were coming for us, and now they won't." The bridge fell silent again, the weight of the moment sinking in. No one knew what the future held, but for now, they had won. They had kept their world safe. "We've done it," Commander Lee said, her voice filled with awe and exhaustion. "Against all odds, we've won. We're going home." The Defiant limped through space, slowly making its way back toward Earth. The journey would be long, and they had no idea how much damage had been done to the planet. But for the first time in weeks, the crew could take a breath. The threat had been vanquished, and humanity had survived. As they approached Earth's orbit, the first signs of their arrival appeared. The distant glow of the planet, once shrouded in fear, now seemed brighter, safer. The Defiant had given everything to protect it, and now they were coming home. Once the ship entered Earth's atmosphere, they would be hailed as heroes, celebrated for their bravery. But Carter knew that the true cost of victory could never be measured in medals or cheers. The Defiant had proven humanity's strength, its resilience, and its determination to survive. But as the ship continued its journey home, Carter couldn't help but think about what came next. The Zathuri had been defeated, but they weren't the only threat out there. Earth had survived, but the universe was still vast, and many dangers waited in the dark corners of space. The war might be over, but humanity's fight for survival would never truly end. "Captain," Lee said, bringing him back to the present. "We're almost there. Earth's in sight." Carter nodded, taking one last look at the stars. He had led his crew through the most dangerous battle humanity had ever faced. They had won, but the cost had been high. There were people on Earth who would never know the sacrifices made in space. There were families who would never see their loved ones again. As the Defiant made its final approach to Earth, Carter looked around at his crew. They were battered, scared, but proud. They had fought for Earth, and they had won. "We're going home," Carter said quietly. "We made it." And with that, the Defiant descended into Earth's atmosphere, the heroes aboard it forever etched into the history of humankind.